Oklahoma. Wide open skies, prairie sunsets, Route 66 nostalgia. That's what the postcards show you. But I've spent months going through courthouse records, visiting sites marked only by historical plaques, walking through towns that barely exist anymore. And what I found changes everything you think you know about this state. Oklahoma isn't just plains and oil wells. It's forced migration burial routes. It's domestic terrorism ground zero, environmental collapse zones, racial violence landscapes erased from textbooks. The archives don't lie. From Tulsa's mass graves to tornadoes that killed entire families, from poisoned towns abandoned by their own government to murders that still haunt these highways, these are 35 verified, documented facts about Oklahoma that will absolutely shock you. Before we begin, if you want more deep dives into the dark history they don't teach in school, hit that subscribe button right now. Trust me, you'll want to see what else I uncover. 35. The Tulsa Race Massacre, an American city destroyed overnight. On May 31, 1921, white mobs descended on Tulsa's Greenwood district known as Black Wall Street. What happened over the next 16 hours was systematic destruction. Up to 300 black residents were killed. Over 1,200 homes were burned to the ground. 10,000 people were left homeless. I have walked those streets in Tulsa, and there is a heaviness you cannot explain. The records show that bodies were loaded onto trucks, taken to unmarked locations, and buried in mass graves. In 2020, archaeologists began excavating those sites. They are still finding remains. The truth is difficult, but it needs to be told. This was not a riot, it was a massacre. 34. The Oklahoma City bombing. America's deadliest domestic terror attack. April 19th, 1995. Timothy McVeigh parked a truck bomb outside the Alfred P. Murrah Federal Building. At 9:02 a.m., the explosion killed 168 people. 19 of them were children in a daycare center on the second floor. Over 680 people were injured. 324 buildings were destroyed or damaged. Standing in that parking lot today, knowing what happened beneath the memorial's reflecting pool, there's a silence that feels wrong. The weight of what happened hangs over downtown Oklahoma City like a shadow that never lifts. 33. Trail of Tears routes through Oklahoma. Forced migration death corridor. In the 1830s, the Cherokee, Choctaw, Chickasaw, Muskogee, and Seminole tribes were forcibly removed from their homelands. 15,000 indigenous people died during the relocation. Many survivors were resettled in present-day Oklahoma. According to historical accounts, entire families perished from disease, starvation, and exposure. I have driven those routes marked by the National Park Service. There is no easy way to say this. Oklahoma was built on displacement and death. The land remembers, even if the history books do not. 32. The Dust Bowl, environmental collapse that forced a mass exodus. The 1930s. Dust storms turned day into night. Nearly 2.5 million people fled the Plains states. Oklahoma farmland became unrecognizable. Soil erosion destroyed entire livelihoods. Witnesses testified that the dust got into everything: your lungs, your food, your eyes. People suffocated in their own homes. Mass poverty followed mass exodus. The earth itself became uninhabitable. 31. More tornado, EF5 destruction through suburbia. May 20th, 2013. An EF5 tornado tore through Moore, Oklahoma. Winds exceeded 200 miles per hour. 24 people were killed, including 7 children. Entire schools were flattened. Neighborhoods were erased. What happened next is difficult to hear. Parents searched through rubble for days, finding only fragments of their former lives. 30. The murders at Girl Scout Camp Scott, 3 children who never came home. June 13, 1977. 3 young campers, Michelle Goose, Lori Farmer, and Doris Milner, were found murdered at Camp Scott in Locust Grove. They were 8, 9, and 10 years old. The case remains one of Oklahoma's most haunting, unsolved crime debates. Jean Leroy Hart was acquitted, but later DNA testing linked him to the scene. I have researched the archives, and what I found was a community that never recovered. parents who never got answers, a camp that closed forever. The locals won't talk about it, but their eyes tell you they know. 29. Tar Creek Superfund Site, one of America's worst toxic disaster zones. Lead mining waste contaminated groundwater with heavy metals. Children in nearby towns recorded dangerous blood lead levels. According to the EPA, the contamination was so severe that entire communities had to be abandoned. I've walked through Peacher, and the emptiness is overwhelming. Abandoned homes, poisoned earth, a town that had to evacuate because the ground itself became lethal. Some places remember. This is one of them. 28. The 1947 Texas City disaster fallout, and how Oklahoma's oil economy was exposed. Nearly 600 people were killed when ships exploded in Texas City. Oklahoma's oil infrastructure was deeply connected to those Gulf refineries. The disaster exposed the fragility of the entire petroleum network that Oklahoma depended on. Economic collapse followed. Workers lost everything overnight. 27. The Spiro Mounds burial disturbance, cultural genocide by looters. The 1930s. Looters destroyed one of North America's most important native burial sites. Thousands of artifacts were stolen, sold privately, and lost forever. Archaeologists called it one of America's worst cultural heritage losses. The records show systematic desecration. Sacred objects were ripped from the earth for profit. What happened here was not archaeology, it was grave robbery on a massive scale. 26. The 2011 Joplin tornado corridor, regional emergency systems overwhelmed. On May 22, 2011, an EF5 tornado killed 158 people in Joplin, Missouri. But the impact reached across Oklahoma's border communities. Emergency systems were overwhelmed. Hospitals filled beyond capacity. First responders described scenes of total devastation. Bodies were recovered for weeks. The tornado was so powerful it stripped asphalt from roads, debarked trees, and drove pieces of straw through telephone poles like bullets. If you're still watching, hit that subscribe button. These stories need to be told, and there are 25 more facts coming that will change how you see Oklahoma forever. 25. Oklahoma prison riot. At McAllister, one of the deadliest uprisings in U.S. history. July 27, 1973. Inmates at the Oklahoma State Penitentiary in McAllister took control of the facility. 3 inmates were killed. Numerous hostages were taken. The riot exposed severe overcrowding and brutality allegations that had been ignored for years. According to court documents, conditions were so inhumane that violence became inevitable. The state had created a powder keg and simply waited for it to explode. 24. The Osage Reign of Terror. Murder for oil wealth. The 1920s. Dozens of Osage Nation members were murdered after oil was discovered under tribal land. The killers wanted to inherit oil rights. They married into families, then systematically eliminated them through poisonings, shootings, and staged accidents. The FBI investigation helped shape early federal authority, but not before entire bloodlines were erased. Standing on that land today, knowing what happened beneath your feet, there is a coldness that has nothing to do with weather. 23. The 1999 Bridge Creek Moore tornado, the strongest wind ever recorded. May 3, 1999. Wind speeds reached 301 miles per hour, the highest ever measured on Earth. 36 people were killed. The tornado was so violent it changed how meteorologists understood what was physically possible. Witnesses described cars thrown like toys and homes disintegrating in seconds. There is no easy way to say this. Some victims were never found whole. 22. Oklahoma State Penitentiary death chamber history, among the highest execution totals since 1976. The McAllister facility has historically carried out executions at rates that put Oklahoma among the top states nationally. But it was the botched lethal injections that made headlines. According to witnesses, inmates took 43 minutes to pass, experiencing severe distress. The state called it humane. The records show otherwise. This is not justice. It is state-sanctioned suffering. 21. The The 1918 influenza pandemic impact. Military camps became death zones. Tens of thousands were infected statewide. Military training camps accelerated the spread. Bodies piled up faster than they could be buried. Temporary mass burial sites expanded across Oklahoma. Entire families were wiped out within days. Locals still remember stories passed down, of streets emptied, of children orphaned overnight, of a silence that fell over towns like a blanket of snow. 20. The Tulsa 1984 Girl Scout leader murders. Violence that changed camp security forever. Murders and assaults around youth camp regions created widespread panic. Parents stopped sending children to camps. Security standards were completely overhauled statewide, but the damage was done. The trust was broken. I have spoken with people who remember that summer, and they all say the same thing. Childhood ended for an entire generation of Oklahoma kids. 19. Oklahoma earthquake swarm induced seismic activity from oil drilling. In 2015, Oklahoma experienced over 900 earthquakes, the highest number in the United States. The United States Geological Survey confirmed the link. Wastewater disposal from oil drilling was fracturing the bedrock beneath people's homes. Families woke to their houses shaking. Foundations cracked. According to geological surveys, Oklahoma went from barely registering earthquakes to becoming the most seismically active region in America. The oil industry knew. They drilled anyway. 18. The 1921 Tulsa mass graves rediscovery, bodies still being found. In 2020, archaeologists located suspected burial sites from the Tulsa Race Massacre. Forensic excavations continue today, nearly a century later. Ground-penetrating radar shows anomalies consistent with mass burials. The records show bodies were dumped in unmarked locations, covered up, forgotten. But the earth keeps its secrets poorly. I felt watched standing near those excavation sites, though I was completely alone. 17. The Canton Asylum for Insane Indians, Federal Psychiatric Abuse. From 1902 to 1934, Native Americans were committed to this federal institution, often without legitimate diagnoses. Over 120 people were buried in the cemetery, with limited documentation. Witnesses testified to horrific conditions. Patients chained, beaten, and left in filth. What happened next is difficult to hear. Many were committed simply for resisting assimilation policies. The asylum was not treatment, it was punishment for being indigenous. 16. The 2015 Oklahoma floods, statewide evacuations, and infrastructure collapse. Massive rainfall caused catastrophic flooding. Multiple fatalities occurred. Entire highways were washed away. First responders described rescuing families from rooftops and pulling bodies from submerged vehicles. The smell of decay hung over affected areas for weeks. Oklahoma's infrastructure simply could not handle the deluge. Towns were cut off for days, surrounded by water, with no way out. 15. Oklahoma lynching history. Lynching and terror. That destroyed black communities. The Equal Justice Initiative documented multiple racial terror lynchings across Oklahoma. They were public mob executions designed to terrorize black communities into submission. According to court documents, perpetrators were rarely prosecuted. Often they were celebrated. Bodies were left hanging as warnings. Families fled in the night, abandoning everything. The records show a systematic campaign of violence that lasted decades. This was not random. This was organized terror. 14. The 1930s Green Corn Rebellion crackdown, an armed socialist uprising suppressed. Farmers rose up against World War I draft policies and economic exploitation. They took up arms in protest. The state response was brutal. There were mass arrests and alleged extrajudicial killings. Witnesses testified that men were dragged from their homes, beaten, and disappeared. The rebellion was suppressed, but the anger never left the communities. I have researched the archives, and what I found was a pattern of state violence against anyone who challenged the system. 13. The 1911 Snyder tornado. Over 180 dead before modern tracking. It was the deadliest tornado in Oklahoma history, before weather prediction existed. Entire families were wiped out. There was no warning. Destruction arrived without announcement. Survivors described a sound like freight trains, then silence. Bodies were scattered across miles of prairie. Some were never identified, and they were buried in mass graves that were marked only with numbers. 12. The 1979 May 3rd tornado outbreak. Devastation that changed research forever. Multiple tornadoes tore across Oklahoma in a single day. The losses were catastrophic enough to trigger the development of modern tornado research programs. But that knowledge came at a price paid in lives. First responders worked for days pulling victims from wreckage. The weight of what happened changed how Oklahoma understood the sky above them. 11. The 2016 Kay County flood disaster, flash flooding that destroyed homes overnight. Entire neighborhoods were underwater within hours. Families evacuated with nothing but the clothes on their backs. According to emergency reports, the flooding was so sudden that some residents barely escaped. Cars were submerged. Homes filled with water up to the roof lines. I've walked through those areas afterward, and you can still see the water lines on buildings, permanent scars, marking how high the destruction reached. 10. The 1935 gross production tax riots, violent clashes over oil revenue. Oil companies refused to pay state taxes. Armed confrontations erupted between corporate enforcers and state authorities. According to historical accounts, shots were fired, and blood was spilled over money that should have funded schools and infrastructure. Oklahoma's oil wealth was being extracted while communities remained poor. The violence revealed a truth. Corporations valued profit over lives. 9. The 2019 Tulsa officer shooting of Terrence Crutcher and the national outcry over racial disparities. Terrence Crutcher's hands were up when he was shot. The footage shows it clearly. The case sparked a national debate over policing and racial disparities in Oklahoma. According to witness testimony, he posed no threat, but he is dead anyway. Standing on that Tulsa street, knowing what happened there, the pavement feels stained. Some things do not wash away. 8. The 1905 devastating Snyder tornado legacy. Infrastructure destroyed before statehood. Before Oklahoma was even a state, tornadoes were already killing its people. The Snyder tornado demolished what little infrastructure existed. Survivors had to rebuild from absolute nothing. No government assistance. No insurance. Just devastation, and the expectation that you would start over or leave. 7. The 2013 El Reno tornado, deadliest for storm chasers, widest ever recorded. May 31st, 2013. The tornado killed experienced meteorologists Tim Samaras, his son Paul, and Carl Young. These were professionals who understood tornadoes better than almost anyone alive. It did not matter. The tornado was 2.6 miles wide. According to the National Weather Service, the tornado changed direction suddenly, trapping vehicles that thought they were in safe positions. I have felt watched driving those roads, an unease I cannot rationally explain. 6. The 1915 Tulsa oil boom. Violence and boomtown labor conflicts turned deadly. Oil brought wealth, but it also brought shootings and riots. Labor disputes erupted into armed conflicts. Workers were expendable. According to historical records, bodies were buried in unmarked graves when deaths occurred. The boom built Tulsa, but it was built on violence and exploitation that nobody wanted to document. 5. The 2007 Tulsa ice storm, a massive infrastructure collapse. Ice accumulated on power lines until they snapped under the weight. Entire neighborhoods lost power for weeks in freezing temperatures. There were multiple fatalities from hypothermia and from carbon monoxide poisoning caused by improper heating. According to emergency reports, elderly residents were found frozen in their homes. The cold does not care about your preparedness. It just takes. 4. The 1932 Oklahoma prison fire, inmates burned alive in unsafe conditions. Fire swept through the detention facility. Inmates were trapped in locked cells. Guards fled. Witnesses testified they heard screams that lasted until the smoke silenced them. The records show the state knew the facility was a death trap. They housed people there anyway. What happened next is difficult to hear. Families were not notified for days. Some bodies were never identified. 3. Lead poisoning in Picher, a town that had to be abandoned. Picher was officially declared uninhabitable. Children showed extreme lead exposure. Their blood was toxic from simply living there. The Environmental Protection Agency ordered evacuation, and entire neighborhoods were abandoned. I have walked through Peacher, and there is a heaviness you cannot explain. Empty homes, poisoned earth, a town killed by the same mining that built it. The silence is absolute. 2. Oklahoma Tornado Alley Death Corridor. Geographic position creates an extreme risk zone. Oklahoma averages dozens of tornado fatalities across decades. Its geographic position places the state directly in the path of colliding air masses that produce the most violent tornadoes on Earth. This is not bad luck. This is geology and meteorology conspiring to make Oklahoma one of the most dangerous places to live in America. The sky is always watching, always waiting. 1. The state built on displacement, disaster, and hidden violence. Oklahoma isn't just plains and oil wells. It is forced migration, burial routes, domestic terrorism ground zero, environmental collapse zones, racial violence landscapes, and natural disaster laboratories. The archives show repeated cycles: removal, boom, collapse, rebuilding, forgetting, repeating. I've spent months researching these facts, and the pattern is undeniable. Oklahoma's history is written in unmarked graves, destroyed communities, and silenced voices. The truth is difficult, but it needs to be told.